I've come to think that there's a view where God has complete foreknowledge that isn't as bad as you're portraying it. So there's in a lot of points where you were looking at the Old Testament and you were saying, well, how could God do this or say this if he foreordained? I agree 100%. Or foreknew. Yeah, not so
much.
Not so sure. And I don't see that this view has a great advantage over open theism, except in sort of preserving the letter of old-fashioned foreknowledge. But
what view are you talking? When you say this view has,
I'm going to describe it.
Okay.
Okay. So first, this isn't the view, but it's like it. Suppose God has, before creation, there's this little period of time where he's got a telescope that he can use to foresee some things.
Right.
He can't see everything at once. So as soon as he decides that he's going to create, he can use the telescope to see what happens next. So if he leaves Adam and Eve free in the garden, that's the first free thing that is going to happen. The first thing he can see with the telescope is she sins. And then again, long before any of this happens, he decides, okay, now I saw that she's going to do that. Well, this is what I'll do in response. I'll kick him out of the garden. Now let's see. And just keeps doing that.
Sure.
And of course, he can do it really fast.
Right.
So maybe it takes a nanosecond.
Right.
To run through the whole history of everything. Now the question is he duplicitous when he says, I intended that you do this,
all right.
but then, but now I've changed my mind. Things like, no, he's not duplicitous. Now shrink that down to less than a nanosecond, shrink it all the way to an instant, and somehow it all happens at once.
Yeah.
That's a picture that some people have.
Okay, so it sounds like what you're saying is, it sounds like, so what if you had God being he's sort of an open theist in a nanosecond,
yes.
So he runs through the preview as an open theist, now he's got all the finished product, and now we're just going to kind of play it out.
And now the movie goes.
Right. Well, so when God says, I regret making human beings, in that view, I guess what you say is, when I first saw this movie, I really regretted that I made human beings.
Yeah.
And now this is the part in the play where I say I regret making human beings.
It seems very, as he's seeing it, he's being sincere when he says, I regret that I...
But he's not seeing it for the first time.
Yeah. But it's at that moment that he commands the guy to write this down. So it's at that moment that, he's feeling regret. Yeah. The issuance of the command happened at, we hear it
sure.
so much later.
Well, it is an echo, and so what I would say is, look at, if you're going to have you're sort of a open theist by proxy, why not just go all the way with it and collapse this nanosecond? I don't see that adds anything except a problem to what you want to say, anyways. It
just preserves the letter of knows everything from the beginning.
I want to hold to that though.
Blue shirt.
Yeah, I just had a question. You brought up the story of Saul and how God was wrong about the character choice of Saul, or at least he thought it was not likely or probable that Saul would rebel. How does God know exactly who to bring to heaven then? Is there a possibility of rebellion occurring hereafter if
Sure.
God cannot read perfectly character choices even in the hereafter, or will God remove freedom to rebel?
Sure. Okay, very good. I address this in my book, Saying the Problem of Evil, and what I suggest there is this. So far as we can see, that it seems like there finally does come an eternal state, whether it happens immediately at death or whether there's intervals we could talk about. That's eschatology. But there is ultimately, like C.S. Lewis says, finality must come sometimes. And it seems like heaven is solidified in a God direction. There's no worry about falling or anything like that. It seems like hell is also solidified, whether you take that as being annihilation or eternal conscious suffering or whatever. There comes a point where there's no more crossing. Now, here's how I make sense out of that. It seems to me that in fact, this has been almost a truism throughout history, a piece of ancient wisdom, that our choices become our habits, and our habits become our character, and our character becomes our being. What is significant about choices, and here also C.S. Lewis is brilliant. What's significant about our choices is not that God's up there with a scale morally evaluating them and at the end of the day says, oh, you've had more good than bad, but rather every choice we make pushes us in a direction. It solidifies us in a direction. And we are in the process, we start by being beings who make choices, certain kinds of choices, but in the end our choices make us. So for example, you start by choosing to love your wife. It may be you get married and you're working in an office where there's this gorgeous secretary who's hitting on you all the time, and it's like a struggle. Say be faithful or not, but you keep on choosing faithfulness, and over time you're not just a person who chooses faithfulness, you become a faithful person. To the point where theoretically the temptation's still there, but now you're the kind of person who would never do that. In fact, it's no longer an attraction for you. And that, I submit to you, is a higher kind of freedom than libertarian freedom. Libertarian freedom, I believe, is a means to an end. It's for a courtship period whereby we become the bride of Christ. And we need to have it because love can't be coerced. But we either become beings who are now not just people who choose to love, but rather we just love. We are loving beings. That's our essence. Without the possibility of doing otherwise, which is why God is more free than we are. He does it by nature. And now we're godly in that respect. Or perhaps people become solidified in the opposite direction, where they're now in the greatest form of bondage, where they don't not only choose not to love God, but they can't love God. They become incapable. They become refuse. No longer, they've lost their human potentiality in that.
Then what about the thief on the cross?
He apparently wasn't solidified against God. And maybe there's a lot of people at death who aren't solidified against God.
Okay.